There is a moment near the very end of Adventure Time where Finn, the boy who has spent his whole life swinging a sword at monsters, finally faces the one enemy he most wants to save instead of strike, a grass creature grown out of his own blade and his own guilt, and he begs and reasons and tries every gentle thing he can think of, and even then, by pure accident, it is his own mechanical arm that finishes what his heart never agreed to, and the thing he could not bring himself to kill on purpose is a version of himself. That is where all of this has been going the entire time, and almost nobody talks about how strange it is that a children's cartoon about a kid and his magic dog quietly turned into a 283-episode argument about what a person is for. Tonight we are going through all of it, the whole philosophy of Finn the human, from the boy who wanted to slay evil to the man who learned to put the sword down. So get comfortable, turn the lights down low, we will be here a while, and if you haven't subscribed yet, it genuinely does help us keep making these. Let me start with something small, because the big questions in this show almost always hide inside small things. Finn was not always Finn. Before Cartoon Network ever aired a frame of him, there was a 7-minute pilot short that went up on Nicktoons in early 2007, made by Pendleton Ward and produced by Frederator for a Nickelodeon showcase called Random Cartoons. And in that pilot, the hero is not named Finn at all. He is named Pen. He is voiced by a boy named Zack Shada, whose younger brother Jeremy would later inherit the role for the series. And the name Pen is almost certainly a little wink at the creator himself, at Pendleton Ward, the pen in Pendleton. So the boy at the center of this enormous melancholy machine started life as a self-portrait, a doodle of the man drawing him, a placeholder for a young animator who, by his own account, spent his childhood indoors, and who built this whole heroic kid out of the kind of adventures he mostly had in his own head. That origin matters more than it looks like it should, because it tells you what kind of hero Finn is. He is not a hero the way a Greek demigod is a hero, born already special, marked out by fate from the first breath. Ward has said in interviews that he built Finn essentially as a Dungeons & Dragons character, a person whose entire job description is to slay monsters, explore dungeons, and find loot, a role you could roll up on a character sheet. And that reflected Ward's own indoor childhood, the fantasy of being the brave one when you spend most of your real hours safe inside. And here is the thing that gives the whole show its engine. A Dungeons & Dragons character is a role you climb into. It is a costume. It is a set of rules about what a good person does. Finn spends 10 seasons discovering that the costume does not fit forever, and that the rules he was handed as a 12-year-old do not survive contact with an actual life. You can even hear the argument buried in his name, if you go looking, and the show did go looking. Finn is an old Irish name. It calls straight back to Fionn mac Cumhaill, Finn McCool, the mythic warrior hero of Irish legend who, exactly like our Finn, is raised without his father and grows up to lead a roving band of warriors called the Fianna. The Old Irish root under the name Finn or Find means fair, bright, blessed, just, true, which is a lot to load onto a fair-haired boy who wants to do the right thing. And then it gets darker, because his surname, once the series finally gives him one, is Mertens. And Mertens is a Flemish and Dutch patronymic that literally means son of Martin. His father is Martin, and Martin, the name, descends from the Latin Martinus, which comes from Mars, the Roman god of war. So Finn Mertens, unpacked all the way down, means something close to the bright true one, son of the son of war. The father quest that eats the back half of the series is stitched into the boy's name before he can even speak. I find that genuinely a little eerie, that a show this loose and improvised planted something that tidy at the root of its hero and then took 8 seasons to water it. For most of the first 2 seasons, though, Finn does not know any of that. He does not know his father, he does not know his mother, he does not know he came from anywhere in particular. What he knows is the strange, bright, post-apocalyptic land where the series lives, and the family that raised him, which is where the show plants its first real idea about him. Finn was raised by dogs. 2 anthropomorphic dogs named Joshua and Margaret found a human baby out in the woods and took him in, which makes their son Jake a magic stretching dog, Finn's adoptive brother. A boy who spent most of his life believing he was the last of his kind in a ruined world, raised by a family that is not his species, loved completely anyway. Read one way, that is the sweetest possible setup. Read another way, it is the story telling you, before it tells you anything else, that Finn's whole identity is something assembled out of what was available, not something he was born already holding. He learned to be a person from dogs, and he turns out fine, better than fine, which is either a joke or a small argument about how identity actually works. I lean toward the argument. And then there is the hat, because with Finn you cannot skip the hat. That white hood with the little bear ears, the thing that basically is his silhouette, did not come from nowhere. It came from an earlier Pendleton Ward student film from his CalArts days, a short called Barista from around 2005, which featured a character named Bueno the Bear, and Finn's hat is essentially Bueno's head transplanted onto a human boy. The two even share a love of beatboxing, which is the kind of detail that only a creator smuggles in on purpose. Inside the show itself, the hat is given a small mythology of its own. Ward has said that baby Finn got it by skinning a bear he fought in the woods, and the series establishes he has worn it since he was tiny. So the most recognizable thing about him, the shape you would draw to mean Finn, is a trophy from a fight and a leftover from an old cartoon, which is a pretty good summary of how this entire character was built, out of borrowed parts and old drawings and the fantasy life of the man holding the pen. That is who we are starting with. Not a chosen one, a made one. And the whole rest of tonight is about what happens when a made hero runs into the parts of being alive that no rulebook covers. The first rulebook he actually gets his hands on is a book, and it is worth pausing on what book it is. Early in the first season, there is an episode built around a hero's handbook called the Enchiridion, a magical volume said to be readable only by a hero of pure heart, and Finn goes on a quest to earn it. Now here is the part I love, and the part the show never explains out loud, because it does not need to. The Enchiridion is a real text. The word is the title of a genuine work of ancient philosophy, the Enchiridion of Epictetus, a short Stoic handbook from the Roman world, and its whole subject is virtue and self-control, and the hard business of telling the difference between what is in your power and what is not. The Greek word itself means something you keep in your hand, a manual, a thing you carry. So the series hands its 12-year-old monster slayer a book, whose title, in the real world, belongs to one of the oldest surviving guides to how to be a good person, under conditions you cannot control. Whether the writers meant every layer of that or just liked the sound of the word, the resonance is perfect, because that is exactly the education Finn is about to get, the long way, over 10 years, without the book. What is funny is that the in-show quest for the Enchiridion is not really a test of strength at all, and the show is sly about revealing it. Finn expects the trials to be about bravery and combat, and some of them are, but the one that actually matters is a moral trap. He is presented with a creature that is described as neutral, neither good nor evil, and he is told to destroy it, and destroying it would be the easy heroic reflex, smash the thing, pass the test. And Finn refuses. He will not kill something that has done no wrong just because a voice of authority told him to. That refusal is the real test, and passing it is what marks him as pure of heart, and I want you to hold on to that early image, because it is the seed of everything. 12-year-old Finn already understands, dimly, that being a hero is not about how much you are willing to destroy. It is about what you refuse to destroy. It takes him the entire series to fully cash that in, but it is right there in season 1. And yet, this is not a saintly child. The show is very deliberate about that, and the deliberateness comes from the top. Pendleton Ward has said in interviews that he intentionally gave early Finn a little wrath, a streak of anger under the heroism, precisely so that he would be more than a purely good kid, more than a wind-up do-gooder. There is a temper in there from the start, a boy who plainly enjoys the fight, who whoops when he gets to hit something, and Ward planted that on purpose as a seed. Watch the early seasons knowing that, and Finn reads differently. His righteousness has heat in it. He does not just want justice, he wants to be the one delivering it, sword first. And that appetite is going to become one of the great problems of his life once he is old enough for it to have consequences. The grass sword rage arc, years later, the arm, the fury he cannot always steer, all of it grows out of that little seed of wrath that a cartoonist deliberately buried in a heroic 12-year-old. There is a reason the series could let Finn grow like that, at that pace, and it is one of the more remarkable production facts about the whole run, one that shaped the philosophy without anyone planning it as philosophy. Finn is voiced by Jeremy Shada, the younger brother of the Zack Shada who voiced Penn in the pilot. Jeremy was about 12 years old when he was cast, and the crew has said they felt lucky to find a boy who sounded so much like the original pilot voice. But a 12-year-old boy does not stay 12, and he does not keep the same voice. Somewhere in the middle of production, Jeremy Shada's voice broke, the way every boy's voice breaks, and the crew faced a decision that most shows make without a second thought. They could recast. Instead, they chose not to. They let Finn's voice deepen along with the actors, and they aged the character to match, so that Finn grows up on screen at roughly the same rate the boy playing him grew up in real life. Finn was, in a very direct sense, playing Jeremy Shada's own adolescence, and Adventure Time matured its themes right alongside the cracking of a real kid's voice. Think about what that does to a show. Most cartoon protagonists are frozen. Bart Simpson has been 10 years old for over 30 years. The kid never changes because the actor's voice never has to. Adventure Time made the opposite choice, and it turned an ordinary casting problem into the spine of the entire series. Because Finn ages, he can outgrow things. Because he outgrows things, the simple hero of Season 1 has to become something else, or become a lie. The showrunner Adam Muto put this beautifully when he described writing Finn over the years. He said Finn started very aggro, very aggressive, but as he got older, it stopped making sense to keep writing him that way. So Finn became a mellower, more introspective version of himself, and that Muto found that satisfying to follow. That is not a plan someone drew up on a whiteboard. That is a show discovering its own subject by letting a boy grow up inside it, and the subject it discovered is the one we are here for tonight. What do you do when the person you were built to be is a person you are growing out of? Before we get to the growing, though, we have to talk about the thing that scares him. Because a philosophy of a person is not complete without knowing what that person is afraid of, and Finn is afraid of exactly one thing that the fearless hero image cannot cover. He is afraid of the ocean. The first season devotes a whole episode to it, in which a strange cloud-like creature crawls up out of Finn's own navel, a manifestation of his terror given a body, and it torments him at the shore. That creature, the Fear Feaster, is voiced by Mark Hamill, which is a small delicious fact on its own, the voice of Luke Skywalker and of the Joker, playing the shape of a little boy's phobia. And what I want to underline is what does not happen in that episode. Finn does not conquer his fear there. The story is structured to look like a hero's triumph over his own weakness, and then it withholds the triumph. He is left still afraid, the fear intact, the creature not really defeated so much as endured. For a show that at this point still mostly delivered clean, heroic wins, that was an unusually honest thing to do, to let the boy stay scared. The fear is not incidental either, and this is where the show does something quietly devastating that it never quite spells out in a single line, which is why the wording matters here. Later, when we finally learn how Finn came to Ooo, we learn that as an infant he was on a raft on the open sea, that a guardian attacked, and that he was separated from his father by force and drifted alone across the water to the land where he would grow up. It never stands a character in front of a camera and says the ocean scares Finn because he was nearly lost to it as a baby. It lets you assemble that yourself. The phobia is canon, established in that first season episode. The traumatic origin of it is strongly implied by the later material, and thematically airtight, but it is implied, not stated, and I think the restraint is the point. Some of the deepest things about a person are things nobody ever says out loud, things that live in the body as a fear of deep water and never once get explained. Finn carries the ocean in him the whole series before he understands why. He does eventually beat it, and the wait for that runs years. The fear that goes unconquered in Season 1 is finally faced down in the 5th season finale, an episode built around a bucket list left behind by a dead hero, where Finn, older now, actually swims out into the ocean he has dreaded his entire life. It is not a throwaway. The series set up the fear at the very beginning and paid it off deep in its heaviest emotional stretch, treating a boy learning to enter the water as an event worth the whole runway. And that is a small but real philosophical statement about how fear works. It does not get argued away. Finn does not have a conversation that fixes it. He does not defeat a monster and wake up cured. He simply, years later, when he is a different and older person, wades in. Courage in this show is almost never the absence of fear. It is the very slow accumulation of enough life to walk into the thing anyway. The Ocean of Fear episode also happens to be a good place to mention a stranger, darker layer of this show that most viewers never saw, because Adventure Time was censored differently in different parts of the world, and Finn's fear got caught in it. According to fan-run censorship catalogs, in certain regional airings, reportedly mostly the Asia-Pacific and Australian feeds, several of the near-drowning shots in that very episode were removed. The images of Finn actually going under judged too intense for younger audiences in those markets. The same catalogs report other trims across the series. A groin kick Finn delivers to a magician swapped out for a zoom on his face. An accidental glimpse of Marceline in the bath, cut down to just Finn's reaction. I want to flag these honestly, because there is no leaked standards and practices memo behind them. They are documented by fans comparing broadcasts rather than by any official statement. So the right way to hold them is reportedly in some regional airings. But the pattern is telling. The moments that got cut were often the ones where Finn was most physically vulnerable, most in danger, most a small body in a big, frightening world. And that vulnerability, the thing some broadcasters wanted to soften, is exactly the thing that makes him a real character instead of an action figure. Ward himself, when asked about network friction, gave a wonderfully mundane answer, that the show got flagged for things like too much poop, or a fart sound held too long, or the word murder used too many times in a scary episode, not for its heavier ideas. The big existential stuff sailed through. It was the fart sounds that got notes. Which brings us to the first of Adventure Time's truly philosophical episodes, and one of its best loved. An episode about living an entire life and then losing it. In the 5th season, Finn falls through a magical fort of pillows and finds himself in another world, a soft place made of cushions, and rather than immediately clawing his way back home, he simply stays and lives. He grows up there. He meets a woman, marries her, has children, watches those children have children. He grows old. He becomes an old man with gray hair and a lifetime of memory, and only at the very end, an old man near death, does he find the way back out, and he tumbles back into Ooh, to discover that in his home world, almost no time has passed at all, that Jake is still right there, that the whole long life he just lived took, from the outside, a matter of moments. And Finn, this boy who has just lived and lost 80 years, gets up, dusts himself off, and reacts to the entire experience with a flat, bewildered little sound. Just, and the episode ends. That episode is a piece of 8th century Chinese literature, wearing a cartoon costume, and once you know that, it never looks the same again. It is a direct adaptation of a Taoist parable from the Tang dynasty, a story by the writer Shen Jiji, sometimes translated as The World Inside a Pillow, in which a young man discontented with his life lies down on a magic pillow at an inn, lives a whole ambitious lifetime of success and failure and old age inside the dream, and wakes to find that the innkeeper's millet has not even finished cooking. The whole life, gone in the time it takes to steam a pot of grain. It is one of the oldest and most famous illustrations of a single idea, that a human life, from the inside enormous and from the outside almost nothing, might be a kind of dream we take far too seriously. A 1200-year-old meditation on the vanity of ambition, and Adventure Time put it in a fort made of couch cushions and let a boy shrug at it. The series doubled the reference too, and the casting gives the game away. There is a beloved episode of Star Trek The Next Generation called The Inner Light, in which Captain Picard lives an entire lifetime, decades, a wife, children, and old age, inside a probe simulation that plays out in about 25 minutes of real time, and wakes back on the ship having lived and lost a whole other self. Adventure Time is clearly nodding at that story, as much as at the Taoist original, and the crew signed the nod, because the old man Finn in the Pillow World is voiced by Jonathan Frakes, who played Commander Riker on that very Star Trek series. They cast a Star Trek actor to play the aged Finn, precisely because the episode is a love letter to a Star Trek episode about living a whole life in a moment. That is the kind of layered, generous reference work that makes this show reward a second and third watch. Decades of literature and television folded into a bedtime cartoon. The making of that episode is full of small human fingerprints, and they are the kind of thing that makes it sound researched rather than dreamed up, so let me name them. The storyboard artist, Steve Wolfhard, has said that the grown-up Finn who lives that whole pillow life was modeled on Howard Keel's character from the 1954 musical 7 Brides for 7 Brothers, which is why old Pillow Finn carries himself the way he does. And Finn's Pillow World wife, Rosalinen, was based on Wolfhard's own real wife, Leslie, so there is a genuine marriage sketched into the fictional one. Another writer on the episode, Tom Herpich, used it to cross something off a personal list, casting the actor Wallace Shawn as the Little Pillow World Oracle, and Herpich wrote afterward that he had finally gotten to cast Shawn in the show, thus shortening his bucket list. And the character designs for that episode went on to win Adventure Time its very first Emmy, the lead designer Andy Ristaino taking the award for the look of the Pillow World. So this small, strange story about mortality is also, behind the curtain, a wedding portrait and a bucket list item, and the series' first trophy. But here is the detail from that episode that stops me every time, and it is the kind of thing you only catch on a rewatch years later. Old man Finn, in the Pillow World, near the end of his long imagined life, has a prosthetic arm. He is missing an arm and wears a false one. And this episode aired in the 5th season, long before Finn actually loses his right arm in the 6th. Fans have cataloged this as deliberate foreshadowing, planted alongside a scatter of other early images, robot arm visions that flicker through Finn's dreams in earlier episodes, moments where for a frame or two the boy has a mechanical limb. The series kept showing you, in dreams and in a Pillow World, a Finn who had lost an arm, years before it took the arm for real. Whether every one of those was planned from the beginning, or whether the writers were pulling on a thread they had left loose and enjoyed tightening, the effect on a viewer who notices is uncanny. It is as if Finn's own future kept leaking backward into his dreams, and that is not even the only time it does that with his arm. Hold that thought, the leaking future, because his very soul does the same thing, and we are getting to that next. What I take from the Pillow World, though, and what I think the show takes from it, is not despair. It would be easy to read that flat little as nihilism, as the boy deciding none of it mattered, a whole life reduced to a shrug. I do not think that is it. Read it the other way, and the is the healthiest possible response to a truth that would break most people. The truth that a life can be simultaneously the biggest thing that ever happened to you, and, from a wide enough distance, a moment, a pot of millet, a nap on a magic pillow. Finn lives the whole thing, loves his wife, raises his kids, grows old, and then loses all of it, and he does not shatter. He gets up. There is a kind of grace in that shrug, a refusal to be destroyed by scale, that a lot of grown philosophers never manage. The boy who could not conquer his fear of the ocean in Season 1 can, by Season 5, live and lose an entire life and simply keep walking. That is growth you cannot fake, and the series earned it one cracked voice and one aged year at a time. Now, the soul. Because Adventure Time, at a certain point, decided to tell you exactly what Finn is made of, going back before there was a Finn at all, and it did it not as a fan theory, but as on-screen canon, established through hypnosis, in the 5th season. In an episode centered on a vault of buried memory, Princess Bubblegum hypnotizes Finn and walks his mind backward, past his own childhood, past his birth, into his past lives. Because in this show, a soul is a thing that has been many things, and the past lives come out in a specific order, and I want to give them to you in that order because they matter. First, furthest back, Finn's soul was a catalyst comet, one of the enormous cosmic bodies that periodically pass through the universe. Then it was a butterfly. Then it was a glowing pink blob, a higher dimensional being. And then, most recently before Finn himself, it was a girl named Shoko. Shoko is where it stops being an abstract curiosity and becomes a knife. Shoko was a thief, a young woman who, in the ancient past of briefly befriended a much younger Princess Bubblegum, was sent to steal from her, and instead came to care for her, before it all went wrong and Shoko died in a pool of radioactive muck, betraying and being betrayed. Bubblegum has, by the show's own telling, been carrying that grief for a very long time, without knowing that the soul she lost came back to her as the boy hero she now works beside. That alone is one of the series' quietest tragedies. But here is the fact that makes people sit up, the one from the deep research, the one I think is the single strangest piece of foreshadowing in the whole series. Shoko had one arm, she was missing an arm, and wore a mechanical replacement. Seasons before Finn loses his own right arm on screen, the series had already told you, buried in a hypnosis sequence, that the previous life of Finn's soul was a one-armed thief. The loss was written into his soul before it was written into his body. Put that next to the Pillow World prosthetic, and something genuinely strange comes into focus. The The show foreshadowed Finn's amputation twice, in two completely different registers, once through a dream of old age, and once through the literal history of his reincarnated soul, both of them planted well before the arm actually came off. I do not think you can fully plan that. I think what you are seeing is a writer's room that had circled an idea, the idea that this boy would one day be broken and remade, and kept unable to stop themselves from hinting at it, in dreams, in past lives, in flickering visions, until the day came to make it real. The soul that was a comet and a butterfly and a blob and a one-armed thief was always, on some level, heading toward loss. That is not how souls work in the real world, obviously, but it is a beautiful way to write a person, as someone whose future is already sedimented in their past. There is one more passenger on that reincarnation train, and it turns the whole thing warmer. According to the storyboard artist Jesse Moynihan, who worked on the mythology of the show, Jake is the reincarnation of Shoko's pet tiger. Shoko had a tiger companion, and that tiger's soul came back as Jake. Which means that Finn and Jake, the human boy and his magic dog, the brothers at the center of everything, are not brothers by accident. Their souls have been together before, a girl and her tiger 1,000 years ago, and they found each other again as a boy and a dog. The bond that carries the whole series, the thing the series finally cares about more than any adventure, turns out to be a bond that has been recurring across lifetimes. Much later, in a special that follows Finn all the way to his death of old age, it seems to circle back to this very idea, as if Finn and Jake are meant to keep finding each other, life after life. Their friendship is not just deep, it is, in the internal logic of U, eternal, older than either of them, older than U. And the writers slipped that into a mid-season episode about a memory vault as though it were an ordinary reveal. The presiding spirit over all of this soul and fate material is a character worth pausing on, because he is the series' little god of destiny, and his design is one of the most gloriously stupid production facts I know. The cosmic owl is a giant owl who appears in dreams, and in the mythology of U, a dream visited by the cosmic owl is prophetic, a croak dream, a vision of your death or your fate. He is, functionally, the dream god of destiny in a show obsessed with fate and reincarnation. And according to the art book for the series, the cosmic owl's look was reverse-engineered from the pattern of light hitting the urinals in the men's bathroom at the studio. The dream god of fate, the owl who shows you your death, was designed from the way light fell on the studio toilets. I find that perfect, and not even ironic. It is the whole show in one fact. The loftiest, most solemn imagery in Adventure Time was built out of the plainest possible material, a boring afternoon in a studio bathroom, the same way its philosophy was built out of fart jokes and a magic dog. U takes the mundane and finds the eternal in it, and the crew making it did exactly the same thing, staring at a urinal until it became a god. Let us talk about love, because a philosophy of Finn that skips his heart skips the place where he does his deepest damage. For the first stretch of the series, Finn carries a straightforward crush on Princess Bubblegum, the pink ruler of the Candy Kingdom, and it is the kind of crush a heroic boy is supposed to have, the princess he rescues, the lady he is loyal to. But the series closes that door in a way that is unusually grown up for a cartoon. Bubblegum is, depending on how you count her strange candy biology, centuries old, and she is fundamentally not going to be the girlfriend of a young teenage boy. And the series lets that be simply, undramatically true. The crush does not get consummated or rewarded. It gets outgrown, which is a theme by now, and Finn's romantic life moves on to someone his own age, someone who is, unfortunately for everyone involved, made of fire. Flame Princess is Finn's first real relationship, and it is built out of a truly dangerous premise, because she is an elemental being of literal flame who burns what she touches, and whose emotions physically destabilize the world around her. When she is upset, things catch fire. When she is heartbroken, she can crack the planet. So the show gets to literalize something every first love vaguely feels like, the sense that this other person could burn your whole life down, and that you might let them. Their romance is sweet and awkward and real, and then Finn ruins it, and the way he ruins it is one of the more morally uncomfortable things the hero of a kids' show has ever done. In an episode from the 5th season, Finn, chasing a feeling from a prophetic dream, deliberately manipulates a situation to make Flame Princess and the Ice King fight, engineering conflict and pain to recreate an image he saw in a dream, and when it comes out, she is rightly done with him. He does not lose her to a monster or a tragedy. He loses her because he was selfish and dishonest, and could not tell the difference between loving a person and using them to feel a certain way. That is a remarkably adult failure to hang on a teenage hero, and the series does not let him off the hook for it. That episode carries one of my favorite hidden fingerprints in the whole series, and it speaks to how seriously the crew took these small emotional beats. There is a shot in it of Finn biting his knuckle as he watches the fight he engineered play out, a gesture of anguish and guilt. The writer Jack Pendarvis explained on his blog that the shot deliberately copies a famous reaction from the 1956 John Ford western The Searchers, the image of the actress Vera Miles biting her knuckle, and Pendarvis noted that the reference eventually made its way into the final episode of the whole series as well. So Finn's guilt in that moment is staged as a direct quotation of a famously loaded gesture in American film, a boy's small betrayal framed with the visual language of a classic tragedy. The crew was reaching for the searchers to draw a teenage breakup. That is the level of care underneath the fart jokes, and it is why the emotional beats land as hard as they do. It is worth saying, too, that Finn's love stories were not marginal to the show's success. They were its peak. The single most watched episode of Adventure Time ever, at around 3.5 million viewers, was an earlier Finn and Flame Princess episode, the one that first brought them together, and there is a lovely production wrinkle to it. According to the series' own accounts, that episode was originally written so light on jokes, so purely emotional, that the showrunner Adam Muto had to go back in and insert gags to balance it, worried it played too straight, too sincere, for a comedy. And it became the highest-rated episode the series ever produced. The audience, it turned out, did not tune in for the fart sounds. They tuned in record numbers, for the sight of a lonely boy and a girl, made of fire, trying and failing to be careful with each other. It almost undercut its own strongest instinct by adding jokes, and then discovered that sincerity was the thing people actually wanted from it. There is one more thread of love in this show I have to handle carefully, because it is not Finn's, but it shapes the whole world he lives in, and it collided with the real world in a way worth telling accurately. Adventure Time built, over years, a deep relationship between Princess Bubblegum and the vampire queen Marceline, and for a long time the show could only imply it. In the summer of 2014, at a book signing for the Adventure Time Encyclopedia, not a convention panel as it is often misremembered, the actress Olivia Olson, who voices Marceline, told the audience that the creator had told her the two characters had dated in the past. She went further on other occasions, suggesting the crew considered the relationship real, but felt they could not depict it openly because it aired in countries where being gay is illegal, and she later posted, then deleted, a tweet partially walking her comments back, and joking that she likes to make things up. So the exact status stayed murky for years, an open secret the series gestured at, and the network could not let it say. I bring it into a story about Finn because it tells you what kind of universe Finn is a citizen of, a universe where love is everywhere, complicated, censored, grieved, and finally, in the last episode, allowed to be plain. Finn grows up in a world that is quietly full of longing it is not always permitted to name, and part of his own growing up is learning to see that longing in the people around him, to stop being the center of every story and start being a witness to other people's hearts. The monster slayer becomes, slowly, someone who notices. Then there is the father, and the father is where the show tests its own philosophy hardest, because the father is a bad man, and Finn has to decide what to do with that. For most of the series, Finn does not know his parents at all. He is the boy raised by dogs, and he fills the silence where a father should be with a fantasy, the way abandoned kids do, imagining that his real dad must be a great man, a hero, someone who lost him tragically, and then he meets him. In the 6th season, Finn finally comes face to face with his biological father, Martin, and Martin is a con artist. He is a smooth, selfish, charming crook, a man who lies as easily as he breathes, who is delighted to see his son mainly insofar as his son can be useful to him, and who will abandon Finn a second time the moment it is convenient. The great heroic father Finn dreamed up for himself turns out to be the exact opposite of a hero, and the series forces the boy, and us, to sit in that disappointment without softening it. The design of Martin carries the joke of him. The storyboard artist Steve Wolfhard has said that Martin was deliberately built to be the moral inverse of his son, as roguish and dishonorable as Finn is heroic, and that Wolfhard based Martin's look on his mental impression of Sean Connery's costume in the 1974 science fiction film Zardoz, a film Wolfhard admits he had never actually watched. So Finn's father, the anti-Finn, was designed from a half-remembered image of a movie the designer never saw, which is somehow the perfect origin for a character who is himself all surface, all borrowed swagger, with nothing solid underneath. Martin is a con, right down to the drawing of him. The show did something brave with the truth of how Finn was lost, and it is worth being precise, because the easy version and the true version point in opposite directions. In a later episode, we finally see the separation, not as legend, but as it happened, and I want to correct the version people sometimes carry, because it flatters Martin more than he deserves, and it also does not let him off as cheaply as cynics assume. Martin did not simply, carelessly, let his baby slip out of his hands. Fleeing his own enemies on a raft with the infant Finn, Martin was attacked by the island's guardian, a monstrous protector that believed they were escaping, and in that moment, Martin did tell the baby he would come back for him, and he did throw himself at the guardian to buy the child's escape. But the guardian's response was to raise a huge wave that tore father and son apart by force, and dragged each of them out to sea on his own. So the separation was violent, and not entirely Martin's choice in that instant. And yet the whole architecture of Martin's life, the running, the enemies, the selfishness that put a baby on a raft in the first place, is his doing, and the series refuses to let one moment of near courage rewrite a lifetime of abandonment. He is not a self-sacrificing dad. He is a selfish man who, once, briefly, did one brave thing while running away, and the series holds both of those truths at the same time, without collapsing them into a tidy redemption. That is one of the most morally mature things Adventure Time ever did. The father wound is planted, like everything else in this show, seasons in advance, in details you would never catch the first time. In an episode where Martin appears, he asks Finn a strange throwaway question, whether Finn has ever seen someone sit a certain way, and demonstrates an odd posture. It reads as nonsense in the moment, and then, much later, when we finally see Martin with baby Finn on the raft, we see the two of them sitting in exactly that position, father and infant son. The throwaway line was a callback planted before we had anything to call back to, a piece of a memory Martin himself was carrying and could not say plainly. In that same earlier episode, Martin builds an escape spaceship and names it the Minnie, and only 2 seasons later do we learn that Finn's mother is named Minerva and that Minnie was her nickname. Martin, the man who abandons everyone, names his getaway vehicle after the woman he left, and the series trusts you to find that on a rewatch and feel the weight of it. Even the con man is haunted. And here we come back around to that name, because the father quest is written into it, as we said at the start, but now it has teeth. Finn Mertens, son of Martin, and Martin from Mars, the god of war. The writers knew what they were doing with that thread, because when Finn's story eventually reaches actual Martian imagery, in the episodes dealing with Mars and its structures, the Martian architecture is stamped with the real astronomical and alchemical glyph for the planet Mars, the circle with the spear and shield arrow, the same symbol that has meant the war god for centuries. Finn's search for his father literally leads him toward the sign of the god of war whose name his father carries. A boy whose name means the bright true one goes looking for the son of war and finds a coward in a con man's coat. The philosophy underneath is almost unbearably simple and almost never stated so plainly in a cartoon. You do not get to choose where you come from. Finn comes from a liar and a runner, from a bloodline stamped with war, and he has to decide, knowing that, what kind of man to be anyway. The whole show is his answer, and his answer is not his father. He meets the origin of himself and chooses to be something better than it, which is the only real freedom any of us gets. The show tells a lot of this story through Finn's body, and specifically through what happens to his right arm. So let me lay the sequence out cleanly, because it is one of the more commonly garbled parts of the whole series, and it is worth getting exactly right. It starts with a sword. Back in the 5th season, Finn buys a magical grass sword from a grassy wizard for the grand sum of $3, and the wizard curses it as he sells it, so that the sword bonds permanently to whoever owns it. No takebacks. It fuses to Finn, becomes part of him, a living green blade that grows out of his arm, and it seems at first like a great deal, a powerful weapon for pocket change. It is not a great deal. It is a curse, and the episode where he buys it tells you so, immediately, in a dream. Finn falls asleep and dreams of grass creeping out of his arm, spreading across his whole body, until he crumbles apart and blows away in the wind. That dream, in the episode where he acquires the sword, foreshadows everything: the curse of the grass, the eventual birth of a grass duplicate of Finn, and the way that duplicate will one day die, scattered on the wind. The series showed you the ending the day it handed him the weapon. The arm comes off in the 6th season, and it comes off because of his father. In the episode where Finn confronts Martin at a cosmic prison called the Citadel, Martin tries to escape, and Finn lunges to stop him, and the cursed grass sword, fused to his arm, makes one last enormous pull, and his right arm is torn clean off. He loses the arm reaching for the father who is abandoning him again. And then a strange thing happens. A drop of blood from the Citadel's guardian falls onto the stump of his arm, and instead of a wound, a flower grows. A small blossom sprouting from the place where his hand used to be. I want to be careful here, because there is a very common fan mix-up that turns this into a crystal or a gem arm grown from his father's blood, and that never happens. It is a conflation, so set it aside. What grows is a flower, from the guardian's blood, not his father's, and it is tender and absurd, and a little beautiful. A boy who reaches for his terrible father and comes back with a flower where his sword arm was. The flower is not the end of it. In a later 6th season episode, the blossom on his stump matures and finally breaks away like a cocoon, and underneath it, Finn has a new arm, a regrown one, with a single thorn left sitting in his palm as a reminder of where it came from. So he is whole again, sort of, for a while. An arm that is not quite the arm he was born with, carrying a thorn. And the writers had, years earlier, made him ambidextrous, a detail the wikis catalog with some delight, because Finn writes and draws with his left hand, but swings his sword with his right, and that little establishing fact softened the blow of the loss, because losing the sword arm did not leave him unable to do everything. He had always been usable on both sides. I find it moving that the show thought about that someone in the writer's room decided years in advance to make the boy ambidextrous so that when they eventually maimed him, it would not be total, so that the loss would be real but survivable. That is care. That is a show that loves its protagonist enough to plan how to hurt him gently. What does the arm mean, though? Because in this show, a lost arm is never only a lost arm. Read one way, the arm is his heroism itself, the sword arm, the part of him that fights, and the series spends its back half slowly taking that away and asking what is left of a hero when you subtract the fighting. Read another way, the arm is his connection to his father, since he loses it reaching for Martin, so that the wound of the missing arm and the wound of the missing father are literally the same wound, the same reach, the same loss. And read a third way, through the grass and the flower and the thorn, the arm is the story of how a curse can also be a kind of blossoming, how the worst thing that happens to you can put out flowers you did not ask for. All three readings are in there at once, and it never picks one, because it does not have to. The image does the work. A boy loses the hand he fights with, grabbing at a father who does not want him, and grows a flower out of the stump. There is a smaller, funnier truth underneath all of this that I think actually matters philosophically, which is that Finn's body was never stable to begin with. The show is notoriously inconsistent about how many fingers its characters have, Finn included, flipping between 3 and 4 and 5 fingers shot to shot, and rather than fix it, the crew leaned into it, even lampshading the whole thing in an episode where a series of vignettes cannot be themed around 5 fingers because, it admits, people in OO do not have a consistent number of fingers. His eye color is canonically blue, but in one very early episode he is briefly drawn with 2 different colored eyes, one green and one blue, something fans have traced to him being hypnotized in that scene, and simply a canonical blue the rest of the time. So even before he loses the arm, Finn's body is a slightly unstable thing, a drawing that will not hold still, a boy whose exact number of fingers is a running gag, and there is something right about that in a show this obsessed with change, that even the hero's physical form is provisional, negotiable, always being redrawn. Nothing about Finn is fixed, not his voice, not his age, not his arm, not his fingers. He is, from the pencil up, a work in progress. And now we arrive at the single choice that I think defines Finn more than any other. The moment the series stops implying its philosophy and states it outright, and it comes at the end of the 6th season. Finn's soul, remember, was once a catalyst comet, one of those vast cosmic bodies, and in the season 6 finale, one of those comets is coming, and after a great struggle, Finn frees it, and the comet turns to him and makes an offer. It offers to take him. It offers to remake him as a cosmic being, to carry him beyond his small mortal life into something eternal, something that transcends the whole grubby business of having a body and getting hurt and growing old and dying. Come with me to the end and the beginning, it says, or struggle here like a beautiful autumn leaf. Godhood, essentially, on one side, and on the other, staying a mortal boy who will eventually fall like a leaf. And Finn says no. He turns it down. He says, and this is the line, that he has put a lot of effort into his meat existence and he would like to see it through. Meat existence. The boy chooses to stay meat, chooses the body that has already lost an arm, the life that has already broken his heart more than once, the whole struggling autumn leaf of it, over becoming an immortal cosmic power. And here is the detail that gives the choice its full weight, that turns it from a nice moment into the thesis of the character. His father, Martin, is right there, and Martin takes the offer. Martin, the con man, the runner, the man who has spent his whole life looking for an exit, accepts the comet's gift and leaves, ascending out of his mortal life and away from his son one final time. So the same choice is offered to father and son side by side, and the father chooses escape, transcendence, the exit, and the son chooses to stay in the mess of being a person. In one moment, the show draws the entire difference between them. Martin flees existence. Finn commits to it. That is the whole philosophy of Finn in a single frame, and it is the philosophical opposite of almost every hero story, which usually wants to make the hero more than human. Adventure Time's hero is offered exactly that and hands it back. The show had been circling this question for a while, most beautifully in an episode a little earlier in the 6th season, one of its strangest and most contemplative, where Finn's astral form leaves his body while he is camping with Jake and drifts out into a kind of dreamlike cosmos. Out there, he meets a deity and asks him the questions the whole series has been asking. He wonders whether being born, being created, is the greatest and most creative act there is, and whether everything after birth is therefore just a long disappointment, a slow entropy, life slowly deflating into a pile of mush. It is a startlingly bleak thing to hear from a cartoon hero, the suggestion that your birth was your peak and it has been downhill ever since. And the deity's answer is Adventure Time's answer, and it is gentle, and it is not what Finn expects. He is told that creating something marvelous is not enough on its own if you do not care for it afterward, that the act of creation means nothing without the tending, and that a good death at the end of a life well cared for can be a greater thing than a birth. Not birth as the peak and everything after as decline. The tending is the point. The caring for the thing after you have made it, that is where the meaning lives. That episode is a good place to talk about how the series could even hold ideas like this, because it came from an unusual hire. That astral episode was written with Gillian Tamaki, an acclaimed comics artist, and her hire fits a pattern fans have noticed, of it pulling in people from the comics world, on the logic that comics is writing and drawing, the same two skills storyboarding needs. By some accounts, the switch was jarring for her, since storyboarding for animation has rules you specifically should not do in comics, and the timing is less flexible than working on a page. And you can feel that outsider's eye in the episode, a sensibility that came from somewhere other than the standard animation pipeline, willing to let a scene sit in silence and ask a flatly unanswerable question. That is how a show ends up staging a conversation about whether birth is the ultimate creative act. You hire a comics artist, and you let her write an episode about the soul. Now, I want to be honest about the philosophy here, because it would be easy to overclaim it. Critics have read Finn and this show through all sorts of serious frames, through existentialism and absurdism, through Albert Camus and his idea of the absurd, the notion of a universe indifferent to us, that we must choose to live in anyway. There is even a dedicated academic book, Adventure Time and Philosophy, published by a real philosophy imprint, that treats it as a genuine object of thought. But those are critics reading it, scholars finding Camus and the Stoics and the Taoists in it, and I want to mark that clearly, rather than put words in the creators' mouths. The writers did not, as far as the record shows, sit down and say, "Let us dramatize the absurd." What they did was let a boy grow up honestly and ask the questions an honest person asks when they start to understand that they are going to die. And it turns out that when you do that with enough care, you rediscover, on your own, the questions the philosophers have been asking for 3,000 years. The comet offers Finn eternity, and Finn, in effect, chooses Camus' answer, that a mortal life you commit to fully is worth more than an escape from it. He just does it while eating a hot dog by a campfire, which is exactly why people love him. If the Comet episode is about choosing your life, the next great Finn episode is about learning to trust yourself inside it, and it is, for my money, the boldest, quietest half-hour the series ever made. In the 7th season, Finn ends up trapped in a cave, and the cave has one rule: to escape it, he has to keep his eyes closed. If he opens his eyes, he does not just lose his place, he resets, his mind snapping back to the exact moment he first shut them, erasing everything he learned in between. So Finn has to navigate his way out of an entire labyrinth blind, feeling his way forward, and every time the fear or the uncertainty gets to be too much, and he opens his eyes to check, he loses all of it and starts over. And because of how the reset works, he ends up spending, in his own subjective experience, a very long time in there, months, by some readings much longer, living in the dark, aging in the dark, going a little feral in the dark, all to learn the one thing the cave is trying to teach him. The thing it is trying to teach him is almost impossible to say without it sounding like a fortune cookie, so let the show say it, because it says it through his little computer friend Bimo, who tells him, "Only open your eyes when something seems different," which means, in practice, stop checking. Stop grasping for external confirmation that you are on the right path. Trust the internal sense that tells you when something has actually changed, and until then, keep going in the dark on your own judgment. It is an episode about learning to act without needing to look, without needing reassurance, without the constant anxious reopening of your eyes to make sure the world still approves of where you are standing. Finn, the boy who spent his whole early life following a hero's handbook and rescuing princesses because that is what heroes do, has to learn to move through the world without looking to anyone or anything to tell him he is doing it right. He has to become his own authority, and the series makes him earn it the hard way, over subjective months of failure, in total darkness, which is the only way anyone ever actually learns it. Almost the entire episode is wordless, and that was a deliberate craft choice with a specific source. By some accounts, the writer Tom Herpich boarded the episode to feel like spoken word laid over music, drawing on moody, near-wordless, atmospheric tracks from a French electronic band while making it. So the episode has a rhythm closer to a piece of music than to a normal cartoon, long stretches of a boy in the dark with almost no dialogue, which is exactly why it works as something to fall asleep to, and exactly why it lodges in people's memory. Herpich is also said to have mentioned, elsewhere, a joke he cut. The title of the episode, The Hall of Egress, egress meaning exit, was going to be tied to a famous trick attributed to the showman P.T. Barnum, who reportedly put up signs in his museum reading this way to the egress, so that patrons, not knowing egress just meant exit, would follow the signs expecting some exotic attraction and find themselves shown out the door, freeing up space for new paying customers. Herpich dropped the reference because he worried it was too obscure, and I love that he cut it, because the episode is better as pure mysterious experience than as a joke with a footnote, but I also love that it was there, that underneath this near-silent meditation on trusting yourself was a buried gag about a 19th century con artist tricking people into leaving. It was, even here, about being led and learning not to be. Pendleton Ward has reportedly named this episode as one of his personal favorites of the entire series, with the crew said to have regarded it as just so thoughtfully done, and you can feel why. It is the series working at full confidence, willing to spend a whole episode on almost nothing happening, on a boy feeling his way through the dark, trusting that the audience will follow a story with no monster to slay and barely any words. That confidence is itself part of the philosophy. A younger, more anxious version of this show would have felt the need to keep checking, to keep reassuring the audience with jokes and action, to keep opening its eyes. By the 7th season, Adventure Time could keep them closed. It had learned the same thing it was teaching Finn. And this is the pivot, really, in his whole arc, the hinge between the two halves of the character. The first Finn, the Season 1 Finn, is defined by looking outward for the rules. There is a handbook that tells him what a hero does. There is a princess who needs saving. There is a clear evil to slay. His moral life is a matter of correctly reading the external situation and applying the code. The later Finn, the one who emerges from that cave, has had every one of those external supports pulled out from under him. The handbook could not tell him what to do about a father who was a con man, or a girlfriend he betrayed, or an arm grown back as grass, or an offer of godhood, or a version of himself he did not want to fight. Those are not problems you look up. Those are problems you have to sit in the dark with, feeling your way, trusting a judgment you are not even sure you have, until something seems different. The Hall of Egress is where the series stops being about a hero who knows the rules and becomes about a person who has to make his own. And it does it with almost no dialogue and a soundtrack borrowed from a French electronic band, which is a strange and wonderful way to grow a character up. The problem the later show hands Finn, the one he cannot look up in a book, turns out to be himself, literally, in the form of a character named Fern. And to understand Fern, you have to understand that Adventure Time had by this point made not one, but several other Finns, and that they all trace back to things Finn himself did. This is one of the more tangled and rewarding pieces of the show's lore, so let me walk it carefully. It starts with a sword again, but a different sword. In one of the 6th season's Stranger episodes, a version of Finn from a dream duplicate, gets caught in a time paradox and is vaporized, and the vaporized dream Finn collapses into a sword, the Finn sword, with a tiny living Finn residing inside a little blue sphere in its hilt. So now Finn walks around carrying a sword that is, in a real sense, another him, a dream self compressed into a blade, a small living copy of himself sealed in glass. The series does not make a huge deal of it at the time. It simply gives him a weapon that is also a person, and lets that sit. Then, at the end of the 7th season, the two swords come together, and this is the birth of Fern. And I want to correct a common muddle right at the top, because people constantly get this wrong. Fern is not made from Finn's severed arm, and he is not made from Jake's shapeshifting. What happens is that Finn's grass arm, the cursed grass, detaches and touches the Finn sword, the one with the little dream Finn inside it, and the grass and the sword fuse. The grass demon that has been lurking behind the whole grass sword curse cocoons the little sword Finn, and out of that fusion comes Fern, a grass humanoid who carries the dream Finn's memories and the grass demon's corruption both at once. So Fern is Finn's dream self and Finn's curse braided into a single new person. He believes, at first, that he is Finn. He has Finn's memories, Finn's face, more or less, Finn's sense of himself as the hero. And then, he has to live with the unbearable discovery that he is the copy, the grass one, the one who is not the real boy, and that envy, the grass demon's envy, eats him alive. In the same stretch of episodes, Princess Bubblegum fits the real Finn with a robotic arm, a clean mechanical prosthetic. And I want to nail this down because it is the last piece people scramble. That is the arm he ends up with, a robot arm from Bubblegum. Not a crystal, not a gem, nothing grown from his father's blood. Robot arm for the real Finn, a whole grass person for the copy. Fern's story is a tragedy, and it is designed to rhyme with Finn's at every step. He turns against Finn out of that envy, becomes an antagonist, and then, in an accident, Finn kills him, in an episode where their fight goes wrong and Fern is destroyed. He is later revived by one of the series' villains and used as a weapon, brought back not out of love, but for someone else's scheme. And his deepest tragedy is a rule the show is very strict about, that Fern has no independent life of his own. He cannot exist without the grass demon that made him. When Fern finally, in the end, kills the grass demon in order to be free of it, to be his own person at last, that very act of freedom is what dooms him, because he had no life force of his own to fall back on, and so he begins to disintegrate. The one thing he wants, to be free, to be himself and not a puppet of the thing that made him, is the thing that kills him. He blows away on the wind, exactly as Finn's very first dream in the Grass Sword episode showed, grass scattering on the wind, seasons and seasons before Fern existed. The foreshadowing closes. And Fern is not even the only alternate Finn, because the show had opened this door years earlier with a wish. Back in the 4th season, in the room of a wish-granting cosmic being, Finn makes a reckless wish that the Lich, the series' great embodiment of death, had never existed, and wishes in that room do not simply come true, they spawn whole altered timelines. Finn's wish creates the Farmworld timeline, an entire alternate reality with an alternate Finn, a Finn raised as a farm boy who never became the hero we know. And in the 7th season, it brings that Farmworld Finn back, and worse, it shows what became of him, because in that other timeline, Finn ended up corrupted by the same ice crown that ruined the Ice King, becoming a villainous figure called Ice Finn, a Finn twisted into the very kind of monster the real Finn spends his life fighting. So the series has, on the board at once, the real Finn, the Dream Finn in the Sword, Fern the Grass Finn, Farmworld Finn, and Ice Finn. Every one of them, a consequence of something Finn or his soul set in motion. Every one of them, a version of the boy under different circumstances. This is the series literalizing the oldest anxious question a person can ask about themselves. Who would I be if things had gone differently? What is in me that only the right or the wrong circumstances would bring out? Adventure Time does not leave that as a thought. It builds the other versions and lets you look at them. It says, here is the you that grew up on a farm and got the crown. Here is the you that is made of your own curse and your own envy. Here is the you sealed in a sword. And crucially, most of these other Finns are worse. The circumstances that made them different made them monsters, or copies, or corpses. Which throws the real Finn's ordinary hard-won decency into relief, because it says his goodness was never guaranteed, was never just his nature. Change one wish, one crown, one sword, and he is Ice Finn. He is Fern. The real Finn is not good because Finns are good. He is good because of the specific accumulation of losses and choices that this particular Finn lived through, and any of the others could have been him. That is a genuinely unsettling thing for a children's show to argue, that your own decency is contingent, that there are versions of you that went bad, and it argues it by making them and standing them next to him. It sets up, deliberately, the confrontation the whole thing has been building toward, the day the real Finn has to stand in front of Fern, two sides of the same coin, sharing the same torment, and decide what a hero does when the monster is himself. Before the confrontation, though, I want to spend some time on the loneliest fact of Finn's whole life, the one the show put in his title, and then spent 10 seasons complicating, which is that he is the human, Finn the human. For the early seasons, the premise is that Finn is the last human being in the land of Oo, maybe the last one anywhere. A single boy of a vanished species in a world of candy people and talking dogs and elementals and vampires. And that is a profound kind of loneliness, deeper than not having a family, the loneliness of not having a kind. Nobody else is what he is. There is no one who shares his body, his mortality, his particular way of being in the world. He is loved, completely, by Jake and by his adoptive family, but he is loved across a species gap, and some part of him knows it, and the series keeps returning to how badly he wants to find another human, how his face lights up at the mere possibility. You see it most clearly in a second season episode where Finn discovers an underground society of hooded creatures he desperately hopes are humans, led by a large mumbling figure he names Susan Strong. He wants so badly for them to be his people that he willfully overlooks all the evidence that they are not quite, that they are something else, mutated fish people. The humans, a degraded folk memory of humanity rather than the real thing. His need for a kind of his own is so strong that he nearly leads them to disaster, trying to make them into the humans he wants them to be. That episode is one of the first places the show quietly admits that its whole premise is more complicated than the title suggests, and it was a deliberate staging, the beginning of a long retcon that the writers built out carefully across the series. Susan Strong and the humans in the early seasons, and then, years later, the full reveal of an entire surviving human colony, were designed to slowly overturn the meaning of the words Finn the human. He was never actually the last. He only believed he was, and the series made his central loneliness into something it could eventually heal, on purpose, over the better part of a decade. There is a small joke buried in his character that I think speaks to this loneliness more than it looks like it should, and it is his catchphrases. Finn's signature exclamations are mathematical words, algebraic and mathematical, And he uses math as a kind of clean substitute for swearing, rhombus, math, the vocabulary of a boy scrubbed of anything harsh. And here is the irony the writers plant deliberately. Finn is, by Princess Bubblegum's own assessment, actually bad at math. He is not a mathematician. He just likes the sound of those big, confident words, likes the way they feel in his mouth, likes shouting something that sounds smart and capable and sure. The wiki reads it, rightly I think, as a badge of his relentless optimism. A kid who does not really understand the thing he is invoking, but invokes it anyway, because it sounds like mastery, like the world makes sense, like everything adds up. There is something a little heartbreaking in that once you know he is bad at it. Algebraic is the shout of a boy insisting the universe is orderly and solvable, from a boy who cannot actually solve it, which is, when you think about it, exactly the position all of us are in. The loneliness of being the only one of your kind is a philosophical problem the show takes seriously, and it is worth naming what it does with it, because it does not do the obvious thing. The obvious move would be to eventually give Finn a whole community of humans, restore his species to him, and let the loneliness be cured by numbers. It flirts with that and then declines it. What it decides instead, slowly, is that being the human was never really about the species at all. Finn's humanity, the thing that makes him Finn, is not that he is biologically a member of a rare group. It is a way of being, a set of choices, a commitment to caring and to mortality, and to growing up honestly. And any of those alternate Finns we just talked about were also human, and most of them went wrong. So the series pries the word human loose from biology and reattaches it to character. To be human, in Adventure Time, in the end, is not to belong to a species. It is to make the kind of choices Finn makes, the meat existence choice, the empathy choice, the growing up choice. Which means the loneliness of being the last of your kind was, all along, pointing at a truth about everyone, that in the way that actually matters each of us is the only one of our kind, and being decent anyway, across the gap, to creatures who are not what we are, is the whole assignment. The candy people and the dogs and the vampires were never the obstacle to Finn's humanity. Learning to love them was the proof of it. The series eventually did let Finn find the humans, and it did it in a mini-series in the 8th season. That is one of the more emotionally serious things Adventure Time ever attempted, and it turns on the mother we have not really met yet. Finn sails across the ocean he once feared, back toward the islands he came from as a baby, and what he finds is not a triumphant homecoming. He finds a surviving colony of humans hidden away on an island, protected, isolated, kept safe from the wider world, and he learns the history of how they came to be so few. A virus, released accidentally, had killed most of the population of the island where he was born, wiping out almost all of a particular group called the Helpers, people whose defining trait, whose whole calling, was a compulsion to care for others. And the last surviving helper, the one who could not save the rest, was Finn's mother, Minerva Campbell. Her name is not an accident, because nothing in this show is. Minerva is the Roman goddess of wisdom, of medicine, and, in her own way, of strategic war. And its Minerva is written as exactly that, a healer, a doctor, a woman whose defining characteristic is a bottomless drive to help people, to fix them, to keep them alive. And what she does when the virus is killing everyone, when her body cannot save enough of them, is one of the strangest, most understated science fiction turns the show ever committed to. She uploads her consciousness. She copies her mind out of her dying body and onto the web, into the machines, and becomes an artificial intelligence, running hundreds of robotic bodies called Minerva bots that fan out to shelter and protect the last humans. Finn's mother, in other words, escaped death by becoming software. She is not dead. That is a load-bearing fact, one people sometimes get wrong because it is so easy to assume a long-lost mother in a tragic backstory must be a ghost. She is not. She survived, in a fashion, by ceasing to be a body and becoming a mind distributed across a network of helpers, still doing the one thing she was compulsively made to do, still helping, forever, without a body to get tired. That is a real idea, and the series knows it is a real idea. What Minerva does is a direct dramatization of what people in the real world call mind uploading, or whole brain emulation, The notion that a mind might be copied out of its biological hardware and run on a machine, and the deep question that idea always raises, which the miniseries stares straight at, is whether the copy is really you. When Finn finally meets his mother, he meets her in a kind of virtual reality, a mind space, and he is meeting a program that thinks it is Minerva, that has her memories, her love, her compulsion to care, and that has spent all these years, in its way, trying to bring her lost son back. It turns out to be the in-universe reason Susan Strong was originally sent across the sea to Ooo in the first place, part of Minerva's long, machine-patient effort to reach the child she lost on the raft. So the mother who could not hold on to her baby has spent a computational eternity trying to find him, and when he finally arrives, what greets him is a question with no clean answer. Is this his mother, or a very good copy of his mother, and does the difference matter if the love is real? It does not resolve it for you. It lets the reunion be joyful and haunted at the same time, and then it makes him say goodbye, because he cannot stay, and she cannot leave the network, and the meeting is also a parting. There is a lovely, slightly maddening wrinkle in Finn's origin that surfaces around all this, and it is the kind of thing that tells you the show was assembled by many hands over many years, not planned to the letter from the start. One of its own tie-in reference books, the Adventure Time Encyclopedia, has been cited by fans as saying Finn got his name from his adoptive dog parents, Joshua and Margaret, who supposedly mistook the human baby for a kind of fish, a mudfish, and named him accordingly. But the actual episode that shows his origin, the raft, the separation, seems to contradict that, since in it the baby Finn already appears to have the name Finn before he is ever separated from his biological parents, suggested by a little name-tagged bear sitting beside him on the raft. So the series and its own encyclopedia disagree about the simplest fact of the hero, how he got his name, one source saying the dogs named him after a fish, and the other showing he was named Finn from birth. I do not raise that to catch it out. I raise it because there is something oddly fitting about the hero of a show, all about the instability of identity, having two contradictory official stories about his own name, as though even the question, "Who are you?" at its simplest, the question of what you are called, comes back doubled and uncertain. Finn's name means the bright true one, and even that, even the name, cannot quite be pinned to a single true story. The boy is a work in progress all the way down to the label. Which brings us, finally, to the end, to the last episode, the place where all of this arrives, and I want to describe what the series chooses to do there, because it is the opposite of what a monster-slaying cartoon is supposed to do, and it is the whole point of the character. The finale gathers the series' largest threats. There is the great chaos deity, an embodiment of pure discord, and there is a war closing in, and there is Fern, the grass version of Finn, revived and weaponized, standing across from the real Finn one more time. And this is the moment the entire series has been building toward. The boy who started as a monster slayer, facing an enemy who is, quite literally, himself. And Finn does not slay him. He refuses. The finale explicitly frames the two of them as two sides of the same coin, sharing the same torment, and instead of fighting, Finn reaches Fern with empathy. He talks to him, he treats him not as a monster to be destroyed, but as a self to be understood, and that recognition, that refusal to make an enemy of his own darkness, is the thing that finally lets Fern find peace. The kid who once wanted nothing more than to slay evil ends his story by declining to slay the thing that looks most like an enemy, because he has learned that the thing that looks most like an enemy is often just a version of you that had a worse life. And the great chaos deity, the biggest threat in the show, is not beaten by force either, and I want to be precise about this because it is central. The embodiment of chaos is not defeated by Finn's sword, or by anyone's sword. It is undone by harmony, by the people of Ooo singing together, a literal song, everyone joining their voices, because the opposite of chaos in this show's cosmology is not a stronger warrior, it is people in accord with one another. The thread of the old wizard trapped inside the Ice King, the tragedy of Simon and the woman who loved him, is resolved by her own self-sacrificing wish, an act of love rather than an act of war. So the climax of a decade of adventures, the final boss of a show about a boy with a sword, is resolved by a song and by a sacrifice of love, and the sword is set down. If you had told a viewer in the first season that this is how it would end, they would not have believed you, and yet it is the only ending the series could honestly have, because it had spent 10 years arguing its way here. Fern does die in the finale, and his death is the redemption the character was owed. Freed at last, no longer a weapon, he uses what is left of him to help, and when he crumbles away, scattering on the wind exactly as Finn's first grass dream predicted all those seasons ago, he leaves behind a single seed, shaped like the Finn sword, and Finn promises to plant it. He takes his own dark double's remains and plants them in the ruins where his home once stood, and that seed grows into a giant tree with a new sword in it, life coming out of the copy, out of the curse, out of the shadow self, made into something that grows. The boy who spent the series losing things, his arm, his father, his first love, his species' loneliness, ends it by planting something. That is the series' answer to entropy, to the astral plane question about whether everything after birth is just a long deflation. No. You tend the thing, you plant the seed, you care for what you have made, even when what you made was your own darkness. I have to tell you about the treehouse, because the showrunner, Adam Muto, said something about the finale that reframes the whole ending, and it is one of the quietly brilliant creative decisions the series made. Fans have pointed to comments from showrunner Adam Muto suggesting that the biggest death in the finale is really the treehouse. Not a character. The fort. The tree fort that Finn and Jake live in. The one that so many episodes opened on. The establishing shot you saw hundreds of times. Gets destroyed in the finale. And it feels like the series chose that as the story's real casualty, precisely because it was never going to kill off Finn and Jake. The show decided, at the end, that it would not kill its heroes, that it would not buy emotional weight the cheap way, with a body. Instead it killed the home. It let the fort be the thing that dies, the symbol, the childhood, the place, so that the ending could carry real loss without the loss being a person. That is the entire philosophy of the series compressed into a production choice. Growing up is not the death of you, it is the death of the place you grew up in. The treehouse falls so that Finn and Jake can walk forward out of their childhood alive. And by one account, the background designer who first drew that fort had modeled it on a real cabin he built himself on a mountain in New Hampshire, so if that story holds, a real cabin somebody actually built with his hands stood behind the most important death in the story, which only makes it land harder. The music of that ending has its own story, and it reaches back to someone who had already left. The song that carries the finale, the one everyone remembers, was written by Rebecca Sugar, who had worked on Adventure Time years earlier and then left to create her own show, Steven Universe. She came back to write this one song, only the second she ever wrote for Adventure Time and the last, and she built it around a simple, devastating idea, that even if something ends, it continues to exist in the past, that nothing ever really goes away. By some accounts, she dedicated the song to Adam Muto, and it may have first played publicly at a convention in the summer of 2018, and it distills the show's entire relationship with time and loss into a few lines a child could sing. That is the emotional logic the whole series runs on, the same logic as her earlier song for it, about how everything stays, but it still changes. Things end and things stay, both at once. The way a whole life can be enormous and also a nap on a magic pillow. The way a soul can be a comet and a butterfly and a one-armed thief and a boy. The way a home can be gone and also always have existed. The finale does not tell you that nothing was lost. It tells you that loss and permanence are the same thing seen from different distances, which is about the most consoling true thing anyone has ever managed to put in a cartoon. Two more small things about that ending, because they are the kind of detail that makes the finale sound like what it was, a room full of people who loved this show getting to say goodbye. The finale gave the show a brand new opening title sequence, made specially by an outside Japanese studio, Science Saru, the studio of a celebrated director, a bespoke intro for the last episode, a final gift of animation from artists outside the usual crew, and the moment in that finale that the internet remembers most, the kiss between Princess Bubblegum and Marceline, the payoff of all those years of implication we talked about earlier, was never actually scripted. The outline for the episode only asked that the two of them have a moment. The storyboard artist handed that vague instruction, Hanna Nystrom, reportedly decided to make the moment a kiss, and as the story goes, the only note she left in the margin of her storyboard beside it was two words: come on. Come on. As in, finally, as in, we all know, as in, let them. So the single best-known image in the whole ending, the thing that made headlines, exists because one artist looked at a vague note and decided the time for implication was over, and wrote "come on" in the margin. It got to be honest at the very end, about that love, and about all of it. And Finn survives. He does not die in the finale. He ends the series alive, 17 years old, still a hero but a different kind of hero than he started as. And the episode leaps forward roughly 1,000 years to show a far future ode, where two new young adventurers, echoes of Finn and Jake, are just starting out, which tells you that Finn's story continued, that he lived a long life, that his way of being a hero outlasted him and got handed down. The show does eventually show his death, but not here and not for years. In a later special, in 2021, it follows Finn all the way to the end and shows him dying of old age, an old man, and reuniting with Jake in the afterlife, the two of them together again, which is the phrase and the title, because their souls, remember, have been finding each other across lifetimes, reaching back long before Ooh itself, to a girl and her tiger. So even Finn's death is not really an ending in this show's terms. It is a reunion. The boy who chose meat existence over godhood, who chose to live and die as a mortal autumn leaf rather than a cosmic power, gets the thing that choice was always secretly about, not eternity, but the people, or the dog, you love, found again on the other side. I have talked a lot tonight about Finn alone, about his fears and his choices and his versions of himself, but a person is also made out of the people they stand next to, and Finn is defined by two in particular who work like moral mirrors, showing him two different ways to be. The first, of course, is Jake, and I will not tell Jake's whole story here, because his philosophy is a subject of its own, but it matters to Finn's what Jake represents to him. Jake is older, and Jake is a dog, and a dog does not live as long as a boy might, and some part of the brotherhood at the center of this show is about mortality, about Finn loving someone he is structurally going to outlive. Jake's whole way of being, loose, improvisational, unbothered, content, is a standing argument that you do not have to strive, that you can just be, that the universe is fine and you can relax into it. And Finn, who is all striving, all effort, always working hard at what he once called his meat existence, needs that argument next to him his whole life, needs someone whose answer to existence is ease rather than effort. They balance each other. The strenuous hero and the relaxed dog, and the show never fully picks a side, because a life probably needs both, the effort to make something and the ease to enjoy it. The other mirror is Princess Bubblegum, and she pulls Finn in the opposite direction from Jake, toward a harder and more troubling model of goodness. Bubblegum is a ruler, a scientist, a pragmatist, someone responsible for the survival of a whole kingdom of fragile candy people. And that responsibility has made her willing to do things a simple hero would never do: to lie, to manipulate, to surveil her own citizens, to make cold calculations about the greater good, all in the name of protecting people she genuinely loves. She is what happens when idealism grows up and has to run a government. And Finn's relationship with her, over the years, is partly the story of him learning that the black and white morality of his childhood, slay evil, save the innocent, does not survive contact with actual power, that the people trying hardest to do good are sometimes the ones forced into the ugliest compromises. He does not always agree with her. Sometimes he is horrified by her, but she teaches him, whether he wants the lesson or not, that being good is not the same as having clean hands, that the world of adults is a world of trade-offs, and that a person can love their people and still do frightening things to keep them safe. Between Jake's ease and Bubblegum's hard pragmatism, Finn has to find his own third way, and the show's whole moral journey for him is the search for a goodness that is neither naive nor cold, that keeps the child's refusal to destroy the innocent while gaining the adult's knowledge that the world is not simple. That third way, if it has a name, is the one he lands on at the very end, when he puts the sword down in front of Fern. Empathy that has grown up, kindness that has been through the whole difficult education and chosen kindness anyway. And that is really the philosophy of Finn, if I had to hand it to you in one piece. He begins as a role, a Dungeons & Dragons character, a costume of heroism handed to a boy who did not choose it, a self-insert for a lonely animator, a set of rules about slaying evil and saving princesses. And the entire series is the slow, patient, often painful process of a real person growing up inside that costume until the costume no longer fits, until slaying evil turns out to be a childish answer to a world that keeps handing him enemies who are really just other versions of himself, until saving princesses gives way to the much harder work of loving actual people badly and learning to do it better. He is offered every escape a story can offer: a hero, godhood, transcendence, a whole life in a dream, a way out of the mortal body, and he turns them all down and stays in the mess. He loses his arm, his father, his first love, his certainty, and he keeps going, and at the end, offered the chance to destroy the darkest version of himself, he sings to it instead. That is the arc. From the boy who wanted to slay everything wrong with the world, to the man who understood that the world is not a thing you slay, it is a thing you tend. It is a strange thing, when you step back, that a show like this existed at all. Adventure Time started as a leaked 7-minute short that a network passed on, a thing its own producer worried was too much of a student film to sell, a preschool-looking cartoon about a boy and a magic dog that a lot of grown-ups probably never bothered to watch closely. And underneath the bright colors and the fart jokes and the deliberately meaningless trapdoors the background artists hid in the corners of every scene, it turned out to be one of the most sustained meditations on growing up, and grief, and mortality, and the trouble of being a person, that television has ever smuggled past its intended audience. Kids watched it and laughed. Those same kids grew up, the way Finn grew up, the way the boy voicing Finn grew up, and went back to it years later and found that it had been talking to them about death and forgiveness and letting go the whole time, waiting for them to be old enough to hear it. That is a rare kind of art, the kind that grows with you, that means one thing when you are 12 and something almost unbearable when you are grown, and it is why people who love this show tend to love it for their whole lives rather than for a season. Finn is at the center of all of it. This made-up boy assembled out of an animator's loneliness and a hat from an old cartoon and the cracking voice of a real child, and what he leaves behind, when you have watched the whole thing and sat with it, is not really a lesson, it is a permission. Permission to grow out of who you were told to be, permission to lose things and keep going, permission to choose your ordinary, mortal, complicated life over any promise of escape from it, and to believe that the tending of that life, the caring for the people in it, is not a smaller thing than heroism, but the truest form of it there ever was. He put a lot of effort into his meat existence, and he saw it through. And somewhere in a far future 1,000 years on, a new kid with a sword is just getting started, which is the show's gentle way of telling you that none of it, not the effort, not the love, not the loss, ever really goes away. So rest easy tonight. Everything stays, even as it changes. If you enjoyed the video, make sure to subscribe, and I'll see you in the next one.